The water turned crimson as Karen's body went limp beneath the surface. Just minutes earlier, she'd been screaming about pool safety regulations, threatening lawsuits, demanding the death trap be shut down. Now she was drowning in the very pool she'd condemned the woman she'd tormented held her life in her hands. Margaret's fingers trembled on the emergency shutoff valve as sirens wailed in the distance. 20 years of harassment had led to this moment. The choice was simple: save her enemy or let karma take its course. The morning sun cast dancing reflections across the pristine surface of Margaret Chen's pool as she adjusted the underwater LED lights for the third time. At 72, she moved with the careful precision of someone who understood that perfection was the only armor against criticism. Her arthritis protested as she reached for the pool skimmer, but she ignored the familiar ache. The Sunset Palms Retirement Community's annual pool inspection was in 2 hours, and everything had to be flawless. Still fussing over that monstrosity, I see Margaret's spine stiffened. She didn't need to turn around to recognize the voice that had haunted her mornings for the past 3 years. Karen Whitmore stood at the chain-link fence that separated their properties, her perfectly coiffed silver hair gleaming like armor, her manicured fingers gripping the metal links with the intensity of a woman preparing for war. "Good morning, Karen." Margaret's voice remained steady, though her knuckles whitened around the skimmer handle. "The inspection is today. I'm just making sure everything meets code." Code. Karen's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "That swimming pool is a death trap, and you know it. The liability alone should terrify you." Margaret finally turned, meeting her neighbor's cold blue eyes. Karen wore her usual uniform of designer, athleisure, and righteous indignation, her HOA board member badge pinned prominently to her zip-up jacket like a sheriff's star. At 68, she carried herself with the authority of someone who'd spent decades bending others to her will. "The pool has passed every inspection for 5 years running," Margaret said quietly. "The safety features exceed county requirements." Safety features. Karen's voice rose to its familiar pitch of manufactured outrage. "You have seniors doing water aerobics in there? Do you understand the insurance nightmare you've created? One slip, one hard episode, one moment of confusion, and you'll lose everything." Mrs. Rodriguez from Unit 47 emerged from her morning walk, slowing as she approached the fence. "Is everything all right here?" "Everything's fine, Elena," Margaret assured her, but Karen seized the opportunity like a predator spotting wounded. "Pray, Elena, you need to hear this. Margaret is running an unlicensed aquatic program for seniors. No certified lifeguard, no medical personnel on standby, no proper insurance coverage. It's only a matter of time before someone gets seriously hurt." Elena's weathered face creased with concern. "Margaret, is this true?" "I host informal water aerobics sessions twice a week," Margaret explained, her patience wearing thin. "Everyone signs, waivers, and I maintain all the proper safety equipment." "The pool meets every waivers," Karen interrupted with a theatrical gasp. "Pieces of paper won't save you when Mrs. Patterson has another dizzy spell and cracks her skull on the concrete, or when Mr. Davidson's pacemaker malfunctions mid-stroke. That's enough." Margaret's voice carried a steel edge that made both women step back. "Elena, you're welcome to join us this afternoon if you'd like to see for yourself. 2 o'clock, just like always." Elena nodded uncertainly and continued her walk, leaving Margaret alone with her nemesis. Karen's smile was predatory, the expression of someone who'd just drawn blood and tasted victory. "You can't keep ignoring the reality, Margaret. I've done my research. Without proper certification, you're operating an illegal recreational facility. The county could shut you down tomorrow if they wanted to. Then why haven't they, Margaret?" Challenged. "You've called them 14 times in the past 6 months. I know because Inspector Morrison tells me every time you file another false complaint." Karen's composure cracked for just a moment, revealing the fury beneath her polished exterior. "False complaints. I'm trying to protect this community from your reckless endangerment. You're trying to control this community just like you control everything else." Margaret's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but each word hit like a hammer blow. "You can't stand that people are happy here, that they have something you can't regulate or ruin. How dare you? How dare I? What? Give people a place to exercise. Help them maintain their independence. Create friendships that don't revolve." Around gossip and petty power plays, Karen's face flushed crimson, her carefully maintained mask of civic concern crumbling completely. "You think you're some kind of saint, don't you? The benevolent pool owner, ministering to the grateful masses." "Well, let me tell you something, Margaret Chen. I've been fighting entitled people like you my entire career. Real estate sharks who think money makes them untouchable. This isn't about money. Everything is about money." Karen's voice cracked like a whip across the morning air. "You bought the biggest unit in the complex, installed that obscene pool to flaunt your wealth, and now you're using it to make the rest of us look bad. Poor Karen, the bitter old woman who won't let people have fun." The mask was completely off now, revealing 20 years of accumulated rage and resentment. Margaret saw it clearly for the first time, not righteous concern for community safety, but pure, undiluted jealousy. "That's what this is really about," Margaret said softly. "You can't stand that people choose to spend time here instead of listening to your complaints at board meetings. I am protecting this community, Karen." Screamed spittle flying from her lips. "When someone dies in that pool land, they willed their blood will be on your hands. Karen, please no. I'm done being reasonable. I'm done filing polite complaints and following proper channels. I'm calling the state health department, the county safety inspector, and my lawyer. By the end of the week, that pool will be drained and sealed, and you'll be facing criminal charges for reckless endangerment." Margaret felt something cold settle in her chest, a terrible certainty that this confrontation had crossed a line from which there would be no return. "You can't do that. Watch me." Karen's smile was triumphant and vicious. "I've already scheduled the emergency inspection for this afternoon, right in the middle of your little water aerobic session. Let's see how confident you feel when the authorities are watching your elderly friends struggling in that death trap." The morning sun seemed to dim as Margaret realized the scope of Karen's malice. This wasn't about safety or regulations. It was about destroying the one thing that brought joy to a dozen lonely seniors. Karen wanted to watch Margaret's world burn, and she'd found the perfect accelerant. "They'll see that everything is perfectly safe," Margaret said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Will they?" Karen's eyes glittered with malevolent satisfaction. "Because I've been documenting every safety violation, every code infraction, every moment of negligent supervision. Did you know that Mrs. Patterson takes blood thinners? Or that Mr. Davidson hasn't disclosed his recent cardiac episodes? What about the fact that your pool alarm system hasn't been professionally tested in 8 months?" Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs. "How do you know? I know everything about everyone in this complex. It's called due diligence." Karen leaned closer to the fence, her voice dropping to a whisper. "By tonight, your precious pool will be condemned, and you'll be facing a lawsuit that will take everything you have left." As Karen walked away, her laughter echoing across the courtyard like the call of a carrion bird, Margaret stared at the crystal-clear water that had become the center of her retirement world. In its depths, she could already see the reflection of her own destruction rippling outward in perfect, devastating circles. The war had begun, and Karen Whitmore intended to leave no survivors. At 1:47 p.m., Margaret stood at her living room window watching the county inspector's white van pull into the Sunset Palms parking lot. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the pool safety equipment, one final time life rings positioned exactly 18 inches apart, emergency shutoff switches clearly marked, first aid kit stocked and visible. Everything was perfect, but perfection had never been enough to satisfy Karen Whitmore. The sliding glass door opened behind her. "Margaret, dear, we're here." She turned to see Mrs. Patterson shuffling in, followed by Mr. Davidson, Elena Rodriguez, and 8 other regulars from their twice-weekly water aerobics group. Their faces glowed with anticipation, unaware that they were walking into an ambush designed to destroy the one bright spot in their retirement years. "Oh my," Mrs. Patterson gasped, catching sight of the inspector approaching with his clipboard and measuring tape. "Is there some sort of problem?" "Just a routine inspection," Margaret lied smoothly, though her stomach churned with acid. "Nothing to worry about." But Karen had already emerged from her unit, moving like a shark scenting blood in the water. She wore a crisp navy blazer and carried a thick manila folder, her evidence of Margaret's supposed crimes. Behind her walked a thin man in an expensive suit whom Margaret didn't recognize. "Inspector Jameson," Karen called out, her voice dripping with false concern. Thank you so much for coming on such short notice. I'm Karen Whitmore, HOA board member and the concerned citizen who filed the complaint. Inspector Jameson, a man in his 50s, nodded politely. Ms. Whitmore, I have your documentation here. Let's take a look at this pool situation. Margaret's group clustered around her uncertainly. Mr. Davidson, a retired engineer, frowned at the official proceedings. Margaret, what's going on? Are we in some kind of trouble? No trouble at all, the inspector assured them, though his tone was professionally neutral. I just need to verify that all safety protocols are being followed. Safety protocols, Elena whispered. We've been coming here for 2 years. It's perfectly safe. Karen's smile was razor-sharp. Oh, Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm sure it feels safe. But feelings and facts are very different things. She opened her folder with theatrical precision. Inspector, I've documented 17 separate safety violations over the past 6 months. Margaret's blood turned to ice. 17 violations? That's impossible. October 3rd, 2:15 p.m. Karen read from her notes. Mrs. Patterson entered the pool without proper supervision, as the designated instructor was inside the house retrieving towels. Mrs. Patterson's face flushed red. I've been swimming since I was 6 years old. November 12th, 1:45 p.m. Karen continued relentlessly. Mr. Davidson experienced what appeared to be cardiac distress, but continued exercising without medical evaluation. It was heartburn, Mr. Davidson protested. From Elena's spicy enchiladas, but Karen was just getting started. She pulled out photographs, dozens of them, taken with a telephoto lens from her bedroom window. December 18th, overcrowding, with 14 participants in a pool designed for recreational use by 8 maximum. January 9th, improper chemical balance evidenced by cloudy water conditions. Margaret stared at the photos in horror. Karen had been stalking them, documenting every moment, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. The thin man in the suit undoubtedly, Karen's lawyer scribbled notes with predatory satisfaction. Inspector Jameson examined the pool with professional thoroughness, testing water chemistry, measuring depths, checking safety equipment. His expression remained neutral, but Margaret caught him glancing at his watch, a man eager to finish an unpleasant task. The chemical levels are within acceptable parameters, he announced. Safety equipment is properly maintained and positioned. Karen's confident smile flickered. But what about the supervision issues? The overcrowding? The medical liability? Ma'am, I'm here to inspect the pool facility, not to evaluate recreational activities. The inspector's patience was clearly wearing thin. The pool itself meets all county safety codes, but the activities taking place here are illegal. Karen's voice rose to its familiar screech. She's running an unlicensed fitness program for seniors without proper insurance or medical supervision. Actually, Mr. Davidson interjected his engineer's mind, finally grasping the situation. There's no law requiring medical supervision for voluntary recreational activities among consenting adults. Karen whirled on him. Consenting adults? You're all over 65. Half of you are on medication that affects balance and cognition. How dare you? Mrs. Patterson's voice shook with indignation. I may be 78, but I'm not incompetent. Statistics prove that seniors have a 400% higher risk of drowning. Statistics prove that isolated seniors have a 300% higher risk of depression and suicide. Elena shot back. This pool saves lives. The inspector cleared his throat loudly. Ladies, gentlemen, I've completed my assessment. The pool facility meets all safety requirements. However, he turned to Margaret, if you're hosting organized activities, you should consider posting clear disclaimers about participating at your own risk. Margaret nodded eagerly. Of course, I'll have signs made immediately. Signs won't protect you from wrongful death lawsuits. Karen's lawyer spoke for the first time, his voice oily with implied threat. My client has documented evidence of negligent endangerment. Your client has documented evidence of seniors exercising safely in a properly maintained pool, Mr. Davidson countered, unless Arizona has outlawed happiness for the elderly. The inspector packed his equipment with obvious relief. The facility passes inspection. Any legal concerns about activities would be a civil matter, not a safety code violation. Karen's face transformed into a mask of pure rage. This is unacceptable. These people are being put at risk. The only thing putting us at risk is your harassment, Mrs. Patterson snapped. "We're not children, Karen. We can make our own decisions. Can you?" Karen's voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "Mrs. Patterson, when did you last have your vision checked? Mr. Davidson, does your cardiologist know about your swimming activities? Alina, are you aware that your diabetes medication can cause sudden hypoglycemic episodes?" The group fell silent, each person suddenly conscious of their own vulnerabilities. Karen pressed her advantage like a knife finding flesh. "You think you're so independent, so capable, but you're one medical emergency away from destroying Margaret's life forever. Is your fun worth that risk?" Margaret watched her friends' faces crumble with doubt and fear. 2 years of building confidence and community shattered in moments. By Karen's calculated cruelty, "Get out." Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, get out of my yard. Get away from my friends. Get your lawyer and your cameras and your toxic hatred out of here before I call the police." Karen's smile returned, triumphant and cold. "Oh, Margaret, you still don't understand. I don't need to stay. The damage is already done." She was right. Margaret could see it in her friends' faces. The seed of doubt had been planted. Their sanctuary had been poisoned with fear and liability and the terrible weight of potential consequences. "This isn't over," Karen announced to the group. "I'll be watching. Every time you enter that pool, every moment you think you're safe, remember that I'm documenting everything. One accident, one emergency, one tragedy, and I'll make sure Margaret pays for every moment of your suffering." As Karen and her lawyer walked away, the water aerobics group dispersed in uncomfortable silence. One by one, Margaret's friends made excuses and left, their joy replaced by the paralyzing fear of lawsuits and liability. By 3:30 p.m., Margaret stood alone beside her beautiful, empty pool, watching the afternoon sun create patterns on the water that no one would see. Karen had won without filing a single legal document or changing a single regulation. She had weaponized fear itself, and fear was the most effective destroyer of all. 3 days of silence stretched across Sunset Palms like a funeral shroud. Margaret's pool sparkled in the Arizona sun, its automated systems maintaining perfect chemical balance for swimmers who would never come. She sat on her patio each morning, watching the empty water and listening to the ghost echoes of laughter that had once filled her backyard. On Thursday morning, a soft knock at her door broke the oppressive quiet. Margaret opened it to find Mrs. Patterson standing uncertainly on the doorstep, her usually bright demeanor clouded with guilt and embarrassment. "I came to apologize," the older woman said without preamble. "We abandoned you when you needed us most." Margaret stepped aside to let her in. "You don't need to apologize." Betty Karen made some very frightening points about liability. Karen made some very calculated attacks, designed to terrify us into submission. Mrs. Patterson's voice carried an edge of steel that surprised them both. "I've been thinking about this for 3 days straight. That woman didn't care about our safety. She wanted to hurt you, and she used our fears as weapons." Sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked the abandoned pool. Mrs. Patterson's hand shook slightly as she reached for her coffee cup, not from age, Margaret realized, but from suppressed anger. "I called my daughter in Phoenix," Mrs. Patterson continued. "She's a nurse practitioner. I asked her about the liability issues Karen raised, and she laughed." Mrs. Patterson's eyes flashed with indignation. She said that if Karen's logic were correct, every community center, gym, and public pool in America would be shut down. Consenting adults assume their own risks when they choose to exercise. Margaret felt the first spark of hope she'd experienced in days. "But the medical conditions are our responsibility to manage, not yours to police." Mrs. Patterson leaned forward intently. "Margaret, that woman has been systematically destroying everything good about this community for 3 years. The book club that disbanded after her concerns about copyright infringement, the potluck dinners that ended after her complaints about food safety, the walking group that dissolved when she insisted on liability waivers. The pattern crystallized with horrifying clarity. Using bureaucracy and legal threats to isolate and control everyone around her. "She's afraid," Margaret said quietly. "She's dangerous," Mrs. Patterson corrected, "and we're going to stop her." Before Margaret could respond, her doorbell rang. Through the window, she could see Alina Rodriguez, Mr. Davidson, and 6 other members of their dispersed water aerobics group clustered on her front porch. "We've been talking," Alina announced as Margaret opened the door. "All of us. And we've reached a unanimous decision." They filed into Margaret's living room with a determined air of revolutionaries planning a coup. Mr. Davidson carried a manila folder that rivaled Karen's in thickness, while Alina brandished what appeared to be a legal document. "I contacted my nephew," Alina explained. "He's a personal injury attorney in Tucson. I asked him to review Karen's claims about liability and negligent endangerment, and he said they're mostly nonsense designed to intimidate seniors into giving up activities they enjoy." Elena's smile was grim with satisfaction. He also said that if someone were to file harassment charges against a neighbor who was systematically documenting and intimidating elderly residents, that would be a very different legal conversation, Mr. Davidson finished, one that Karen might not enjoy as much. Margaret stared at her friends, really looked at them for the first time since the inspection. These weren't frail, helpless seniors cowering before Karen's threats. They were experienced adults who'd survived decades of challenges, raised families, built careers, and accumulated the wisdom that comes from refusing to be defeated by bullies. "We want our pool back," Mrs. Patterson said simply. "More than that, we want our lives back. Karen Whitmore has spent 3 years making us afraid of our own shadows. It ends today. But the risks she mentioned are the same risks we face. Every day just by being alive," Alina interrupted. "We could slip in our showers, choke on our medication, have heart attacks walking to the mailbox. Should we stop living because death is possible?" Mr. Davidson opened his folder, revealing a thick stack of documentation. "I've been busy these past 3 days. Turns out, Karen's harassment campaign extends beyond just you. I've found 12 residents who've been targeted by her safety concerns over the past 2 years. Formal objections to the Martinez family's children visiting noise violations and safety hazards, and citations against Mr. Thompson for feeding stray cats health code violations. She's not protecting anyone," Margaret realized. "She's controlling everyone." "Exactly. And her method is always the same: identify something that brings people joy, then manufacture safety concerns and legal threats until they give up." Mr. Davidson's engineer's mind had dissected Karen's strategy with clinical precision. It's psychological terrorism disguised as civic responsibility. Mrs. Patterson pulled out her own documentation printouts from online forums where Karen had posted complaints about unsafe elderly recreational activities at their community. The posts painted Margaret as a reckless predator exploiting vulnerable seniors for profit. "She's been spreading lies about you online," Mrs. Patterson said grimly, "trying to damage your reputation beyond just our little community." Margaret felt something cold and hard crystallize in her chest. This wasn't about pool safety or community welfare. It was about Karen's pathological need to destroy anything that didn't revolve around her authority. "What do you want me to do?" Margaret asked. "We want you to reopen the pool," Alina said firmly. "This Saturday, full water aerobics session. All of us will be there. And when Karen calls the authorities again, let her—" Mr. Davidson's smile was sharp as broken glass. "My nephew's law firm is very interested in discussing harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress with Ms. Whitmore. Apparently, targeting seniors specifically makes it a much more serious offense." Margaret looked around the room at faces that had transformed from fearful to fierce. 3 days ago, Karen had scattered them like leaves in a hurricane. Now they'd regrouped, researched, and prepared for war. "She escalates," Margaret warned. "Karen doesn't back down gracefully." "Good," Mrs. Patterson said with a satisfaction that would have shocked her grandchildren, "because neither do we." As her friends filed out to spread the word about Saturday's pool reopening, Margaret felt the first real smile cross her face in days. Karen had made a critical miscalculation. She'd assumed that fear would keep them permanently cowed. Instead, she'd given them time to think, research, and realize that their enemy wasn't as powerful as she pretended to be. Saturday would bring a reckoning, but this time they would be ready for Karen Whitmore's war. The revolution would begin in chlorinated water, and it would end with the restoration of a simple truth: that joy was worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Saturday morning dawned with the kind of brilliant Arizona sunshine that made everything seem possible. Margaret stood at her kitchen window, watching her friends arrive one by one. their faces bright with the defiant joy of people reclaiming stolen territory. Mrs. Patterson carried a new pool bag. Alina brought homemade energy bars. And Mr. Davidson wore swimming trunks that hadn't seen water in 3 days, but looked freshly pressed for battle. At exactly 2 p.m., they gathered around the pool like veterans returning to a beloved battlefield. The water sparkled with invitation, and for a moment, the past week's trauma dissolved in the face of pure anticipation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Margaret announced, "welcome back to Saturday Water Aerobics." The cheer that erupted from 12 elderly throats could have been heard 3 blocks away. It was a declaration of war disguised as exercise class, and everyone knew it. Karen's response was immediate and predictable. Within minutes of the first splash, she appeared at the fence with her camera, documenting everything with the fervor of a war correspondent. But this time, the group was ready for her. "Good afternoon, Karen," Mrs. Patterson called out cheerfully. "Beautiful day for a swim, isn't it?" Karen's jaw tightened. "You people are making a terrible mistake. I warned you about the liability." "Yes, you did," Alina interrupted, floating peacefully on a pool noodle. "And we had lawyers review your concerns. Turns out harassment is a much bigger legal problem than seniors choosing to exercise." For the first time since Margaret had known her, Karen looked genuinely surprised. The carefully maintained mask of civic concern cracked, revealing the petty tyrant beneath. "Harassment? I'm protecting this community. From what Mr. Davidson challenged, from friendship, from exercise, from happiness, from lawsuits that will destroy your lives." Karen's voice rose to a familiar shriek. "When someone gets hurt, and I'll make sure everyone knows I tried to prevent it." "When someone gets hurt," Mrs. Patterson said with deadly calm, "it will be because a bitter old woman spent years trying to make people afraid of living." Karen's face went white with rage. She fumbled for her phone, fingers shaking as she dialed. "This ends now. I'm calling the fire department, the health department, and the police. We'll see how confident you feel when you're all arrested." For trespassing and reckless endangerment, actually, a new voice interrupted from behind her. "You might want to reconsider that call." Everyone turned to see a tall woman in a business suit approaching the fence. She carried herself with the confident authority of someone accustomed to courtrooms and intimidated by nothing. "I'm Sarah Rodriguez, Elena's niece," the woman announced. "I'm also the attorney who's been reviewing the harassment complaints against you, Ms. Whitmore." Karen's phone slipped from nerveless fingers. Harassment complaints. 12 separate. "Residents have documented your systematic campaign of intimidation and threats. Creating a hostile living environment for seniors is a serious matter, particularly when it involves photographing people without consent and making false reports to authorities." "False reports," Karen sputtered. "Everything I've reported is factual, but malicious," Sarah countered smoothly. "There's a legal distinction between legitimate safety concerns and using bureaucracy to terrorize your neighbors. Your online posts calling my aunt's friends death-seeking seniors and describing Mrs. Chen as a predatory pool operator cross several legal lines." Margaret watched Karen's confident facade crumble in real time. The woman who'd spent 3 years wielding legal threats like weapons suddenly found herself on the receiving end of actual legal expertise. "I have every right to express concerns about community safety," Karen said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "You have the right to express concerns. You don't have the right to stalk, photograph, harass, and defame people who disagree with you." Sarah's smile was professional and terrifying, particularly vulnerable seniors who just want to exercise in peace. "Vulnerable?" Mrs. Patterson snorted. "Speak for yourself, honey. We're plenty tough enough to handle one nasty neighbor." But Karen wasn't listening anymore. Her world of absolute control was dissolving, and panic was setting in. For 3 years, she'd been the neighborhood's self-appointed sheriff, using fear and bureaucracy to bend everyone to her will. Now she faced the possibility of being held accountable for her actions. "This is ridiculous," Karen said desperately. "I'm trying to prevent tragedies." "No," Margaret said quietly, stepping out of the pool. "You're trying to prevent happiness. There's a difference." Something in Margaret's voice, the quiet certainty of someone who'd finally seen through the lie, seemed to break Karen's last restraint. The mask didn't just slip. It shattered completely. "Happiness." Karen's laugh was bitter and broken. "You want to talk about happiness? You moved into this complex with your fancy pool and your perfect retirement, and everyone started gravitating toward you. Do you know what it's like to watch people choose someone else's company over yours? To see them light up for a stranger when they barely tolerate you? The raw pain in Karen's voice caught everyone off guard. For a moment, the neighborhood tyrant looked like exactly what she was, a lonely old woman who'd weaponized her authority because she couldn't earn affection. "Karen," Margaret said gently, "you could have just asked to join." "Join," Karen's voice cracked. "Join your little club of grateful admirers. Be another senior citizen grateful for scraps of attention from the generous pool owner." "Join a group of friends," Elena corrected. "That's all we ever were." But the moment of vulnerability vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Karen's face hardened back into familiar lines of bitter determination. "Friends don't last," she said coldly. "Legal liability does. And I promise you, the next person who gets hurt in that pool will be the end of all your precious friendships." She turned and stalked toward her house, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than her threats ever had. Sarah packed up her briefcase with professional efficiency, but her expression was troubled. "She's not going to stop," Sarah warned. "People like that don't back down, they escalate." Margaret looked at the pool, then at her friends concerned. Faces, they'd won this battle. But Karen's parting words carried the weight of prophecy. The war was far from over, and their enemy was becoming increasingly desperate. "Let her escalate," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "We're not children to be bullied by a bitter old woman." But as Karen's bedroom window slammed shut with enough force to rattle the glass, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just pushed their enemy past the point of rational opposition. Desperate people did desperate things, and Karen Whitmore had just revealed herself to be very desperate indeed. The next phase of their war wouldn't be fought with lawyers and legal threats. It would be uglier, more personal, and far more dangerous than any of them realized. The escalation began 3 days later with sabotage so subtle that Margaret almost missed it. The pool's chemical balance had shifted overnight, not enough to be dangerous, but sufficient to cloud the water and trigger the automatic safety shutdown. When she tested the levels, she found traces of dish soap in the filtration system. "She's trying to make the pool fail inspection," Mr. Davidson concluded after examining the evidence. "Create actual safety violations to justify her complaints." Margaret stared at the sudsy residue clinging to the filter housing. "She climbed my fence in the middle of the night to pour soap into my pool." "Desperate people do desperate things," Elena said grimly. "And Karen's definitely desperate." They cleaned the system and resumed their regular sessions, but the psychological damage was done. Karen had crossed the line from harassment into criminal activity, and everyone knew it was only the beginning. The second attack came 5 days later during their Thursday morning session. Margaret was demonstrating proper breathing techniques when she noticed Karen standing at her bedroom window, not with a camera this time, but with what appeared to be a professional video camera mounted on a tripod. "She's live streaming us," Mrs. Patterson realized with horror. "That's a broadcasting setup." The violation felt more intimate than any previous harassment. Karen wasn't just documenting their activities, she was turning them into entertainment for strangers, reducing their private moments of joy to content for whatever online audience she'd cultivated. Margaret's hands shook as she helped everyone out of the pool. "We need to call the police and tell them what," Mr. Davidson asked bitterly. "That our neighbor is filming us from her own window. There's no law against that, but there should have been," Margaret thought, as she watched Karen adjust her camera angle for better coverage. The woman had found the perfect loophole legal surveillance designed to destroy their sense of safety and privacy. The breaking point came on Saturday morning, exactly 2 weeks after their triumphant pool reopening. Margaret woke to find her pool gate standing open, security alarm disabled, and fresh footprints in the muddy flower bed beside the filtration equipment. This time, Karen hadn't settled for soap. She'd opened the main drain valve and dumped what smelled like bleach concentrate directly into the water. The pool was a toxic soup that would take days to drain and refill, assuming the chemical damage hadn't destroyed the expensive filtration system entirely. Margaret stood in her ruined backyard, staring at 3 months' worth of water and chemical bills floating in a pool that might never be safely swimmable again. Karen had escalated from harassment to property destruction, and the police would barely care about a neighbor dispute involving pool chemicals. "That's it," Mrs. Patterson declared when she arrived to find Margaret sitting defeated on her patio. "We're done playing defense. What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that Karen wants to film us so badly. Let's give her something worth recording." By noon, word had spread through the entire complex. Not just the water aerobics group, but every resident who'd suffered under Karen's 3-year reign of manufactured crises. They arrived carrying folding chairs, umbrellas, picnic lunches, and the grim determination of people who'd finally had enough. "Peaceful demonstration," Alina announced as 47 residents arranged themselves around Margaret's poisoned pool. "We're not trespassing, we're not threatening anyone, and we're not breaking any laws. We're just sitting here, showing community support for a neighbor who's been systematically harassed." Karen's response was immediate and hysterical. She burst from her house like a woman fleeing a fire, her camera forgotten as she confronted the sea of folding chairs and defiant faces. "What is this?" she shrieked. "This is private property. You can't just wear guests," Mr. Davidson interrupted calmly. "Margaret invited us to her property for a community gathering." "Perfectly legal. This is harassment. You're intimidating me." "We're sitting quietly in lawn chairs," Mrs. Patterson observed. "If that intimidates you, perhaps you should examine your own behavior." Karen's wild eyes fixed on Margaret, who sat beside her ruined pool like a general surveying a battlefield. "You think this changes anything? You think your little protest will undo what I've done to your precious pool?" "No," Margaret said quietly, "but it shows everyone exactly who you really are." Karen's laughter was sharp and brittle. "Who I really am? I'm the only person in this complex with the courage to stand up for safety and standards." "You're a bitter old woman who destroys things she can't control," Alina said with devastating calm, "and everyone here knows it." The words hit Karen like physical blows. She looked around the circle of faces neighbors she'd complained about, intimidated, and driven away from community activities for 3 years. Not one showed sympathy or support. They'd united against her, and she was finally completely alone. "Fine," Karen said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You want to see what I'm really capable of? You want to learn what happens when you push someone too far?" She stormed toward her house, then stopped and turned back with a smile that chilled Margaret's blood. "Enjoy your little victory party. But remember what I told you, someone's going to get hurt in that pool. And when they do, when the lawsuits start flying and the criminal charges are filed, every single one of you will remember that I tried to prevent it." She slammed her door with enough force to crack the frame, leaving 47 people sitting in uncomfortable silence around a pool that looked like a crime scene. "She's planning something," Mrs. Patterson said what everyone was thinking. "Something worse than soap and bleach." Margaret stared at Karen's closed blinds, remembering the woman's final smile, not angry anymore, but coldly purposeful. The expression of someone who'd moved beyond harassment and destruction into something far more dangerous. "We should call the police," Alina suggested, "and tell them that our neighbor threatened to prove she was right about pool safety." Mr. Davidson shook his head grimly. "They'll laugh us out of the station." As the demonstration dissolved and people returned to their homes, Margaret remained beside her poisoned pool, watching Karen's window for movement. 3 weeks ago, this had been about water aerobics and community harassment. Now it felt like something much darker. A woman pushed beyond rational behavior into a realm where winning justified any cost. Karen's parting words echoed in Margaret's mind. Someone's going to get hurt in that pool. Not a prediction anymore, but a promise. And Margaret was beginning to understand that Karen intended to make sure that promise came true.